Hello and welcome to the Reason Roundtable. This is your weekly libertarian take on news and culture from the editors of Reason Magazine and friends. If you're tired of the choices offered by today's politics, you have come to the right place. I'm your host, Peter Suderman, and today I am joined by my illustrious colleagues, Katherine Mangu-Ward, welcome back, and Nick Gillespie, as well as very special guest, Reem Ibrahim, head of media at the Institute of Economic Affairs in London. Everybody say hello.
Howdy.
Hi.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on this show. Welcome. I see on your X banner, your Twitter banner, you have an image of you, I think on like a panel or something. It says, "Bad policy, worse outcomes, the case of prohibitionism." Feels like someone with that banner should be on the show. I think you're in the right spot.
Thank you. Yeah, well, look, I mean, in the UK, we've got a lot of prohibitionist policies. We seem to be copying 19th century United States. So I think it was particularly fitting.
Yeah, I think we're going to talk about some of that here on the show. Happy Monday to everyone who isn't being replaced by AI, which apparently doesn't include dead kids being used as political props to push for gun bans. So last week, former CNN personality Jim Acosta interviewed an AI avatar, a kind of an LLM simulation of a student who was killed in the mass shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida in 2018. And of course, the AI version of this kid, who sadly was murdered in that mass shooting, called for, quote, stronger gun control laws as part of the solution to gun violence. This was with the permission of the kid's parents. Some reporting says it was actually the father's idea. He came to Acosta. But people objected to this as a kind of a gross exploitation of a dead child. AI shouldn't be used this way, they said. It amounts to a kind of novel form of technological exploitation. But I think this is not actually very new. And it's not the technology here that bugs me. Because if you look at the aftermath of any one of these tragic, high-profile kind of media obsession shootings, the media, places like CNN, where Jim Acosta used to work until January of this year, they use the victims as props to push for gun control. Acosta's stunt was just a high-tech version of the same thing we have seen over and over again from the legacy media. So, Katherine, I want to start with you. What do you think about this unofficial episode of Black Mirror?
Yeah, I am definitely now and always against using kids to make political points. Like, that's the first thing. I just think when people bring their kids to rallies, it's gross. When people sort of stick a sign, especially in the hands of very small children who can't even really understand what's going on, I think it's gross. I think that is the parallel here. These are teenagers, but still not somebody who really understood or gave his consent to this because he's dead. And I think that you are right that the AI angle is something of a red herring. Like, we need to sort out the rights to who can use your voice and your face after you die. It's a broader legal question, but here I actually think the kind of consent aspect of it feels like the main one.
Nick, so part of what strikes me about this interview is that it's coming at a time when crime of all sorts, but particularly violent crime, is actually down across the United States. So there was actually new FBI data last week showing like a 4.5% drop in crime overall, but a 14.9% drop in homicides last year. So the argument for gun control has always been it's necessary to stop people from killing each other. But there's now a huge drop in crime that didn't come with new gun bans. In fact, as one of our listeners pointed out in a letter recently, the tax bill that we talked about so many times on this show actually deregulated suppressors, which was kind of interesting, right? So this is all just coming at a time when crime is already down. Why are we seeing this push for gun control now?
I'm not sure that we are. And there have been, a number of red flag laws and things like that. So the gun control situation is always dynamic. The fact is, compared to 30 years ago, their guns are much more freely available to more people and to carry more people. And the connection with crime tends to be, more guns makes for a more polite society. I want to go to the two quick topics, though. One is using the AI avatar. The parents are the one who did this, and they brought it to Jim Acosta, who describes himself, by the way, on his Substack as a fearless journalist, which, take that for what it's worth. I like the idea of using AI avatars and whatnot. Everything that makes us have to deal with the fact that news is constructed. It is not natural. It's, I don't think there's that big a leap from talking to an AI avatar to what we're doing now, or when you drag some kind of animatronic humanoid who, works for the Democratic or Republican Party on a talk show. They're no more synthetic than this avatar. To go to the content of the actual, conversation that was going on here, part of the discussion was a call for more strident gun control. A lot of it was more kind of general blather, which is understandable coming from the parents' perspective about helping with mental health and making kids feel included in schools and things like that. But the real, if we reopen the Douglas shooting, the school shooting that this is, coming out of, the fact is that the shooter was expelled from the school. He had there were 30 reports with the local Child Protective Services about him being violent towards his mother and others. A woman had a 15-minute long conversation with an FBI agent about him. That none of that led to anything. And then most grotesquely, the school resource officer did not engage him. Other cops who were present there did not do anything for 6 minutes or so while the shooting was happening. We should go back and look at this. This is a case where all of the existing laws that were in place should have done all sorts of things to protect the kids in that school from the shooter. And at every level, the institutions failed, not because we need new laws, but because they were not following existing procedures. And to the extent that it reopens a conversation about that, it might actually be a useful exercise.
This is, in a way, the big idea of the new movie Weapons that opened this weekend. It's actually a somewhat opaque film. I'm going to talk about it a little bit more later, but kind of the idea of it is that we have weaponized children and that we have done irreparable harm to them in so many ways in society, and that adults, authority figures of all kinds, following bureaucratic rules, just trying to be nice, trying to do good things for our kids, they failed. And they failed in every possible way. But again, we'll talk about this a little bit more later. Reem, I want to go to you. In the UK, you don't have a lot of debates about gun control because private firearm ownership is already heavily restricted. It's not completely impossible to own a gun, but it's very difficult to own one legally. But you do have these debates about knife control. And there are sometimes, I mean, in the recent Slack, I will just say people post this stuff from British officials and are like, this is silly. This is kind of ridiculous. But I think it's also kind of telling, right? Because you have Keir Starmer's Labour government like launched this whole anti-knife campaign. You've got Idris Elba involved, right? You're going to have tougher age checks on knife buyers. Social media firms have been warned, right, that they got to follow a bunch of rules. They've banned what Reuters describes as zombie-style knives. I don't even know what a zombie-style knife is. It sounds actually
very cool.
Yeah, it sounds terrifyingly cool. And ninja swords, maybe there's a real problem with ninja sword crime, but like what strikes me here is even in a country with incredibly tough gun control laws in place, you still have politicians making a show of being tough on crime, basically by trying to restrict access to tools.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And if anything, it's a huge warning to Americans that actually, if you think all of these restrictions and these calls for restrictions will stop at guns, that isn't the case at all. And actually, these restrictions will continue and they'll continue to no end. The nanny state has no end at all. And it's really interesting when it comes to knife crime in the UK in particular, because it's a great example of what a country looks like where instead of targeting the actual criminals or addressing all of the different incentives for very, very violent crime, the powers that be instead obsessively focus on the specific tools that those criminals choose to use and then tighten the screws on them. So, I mean, as you just said, the fact that the government are looking at restricting the use of that is basically as a result of the amount of young people that are dying as a result of knife crime. Now, I live in London. I know knife crime is absolutely abhorrent. I went to school with students that often carried knives, and it was really, really scary. But every time politicians use children as a front towards more authoritarian measures, it means that it's very, very difficult to argue with. And if you're somebody that argues against it, you come across as particularly negative. I mean, there are like more than 50,000 offences that involve a knife, or a like other sharp instrument in England and Wales every year. That is increasing significantly. Last year, there was a really, really quite prolific crime where 3 young girls passed away as a result of a man called Axel who came in with a huge machete and murdered those 3 very, very young girls at a Taylor Swift themed dance class. And it was really awful. Awful situation. But Axel, the murderer, had been referred to the government's own prevent scheme 3 times before that had happened. So the fact of the matter is, the fact that he was able to access a knife had absolutely nothing to do with the fact that he committed that crime. The government, their own scheme, were already aware of the fact that he was turning into radicalization and radical ideologies. He was literally referred by his parents in that same instance, and yet the government failed to protect those children. And so, of course, the first thing they do is try and restrict the access to knives. Now, we can go into all of the different aspects of this, but obviously when the government introduce identification measures for knife crime, for access to knives, what will end up happening is a huge black market for knives, which will ultimately end up in making the situation a hell of a lot worse.
Catherine, I just want to ask you about the situation in D.C. because I feel like there is a parallel here just happening right now this week where Donald Trump has decided that after an attack, what looks like a pretty horrific attack on one of the Doge programmers who his nickname is Big Balls. This is what they print in like the New York Times. I'm sorry. This is the name. This is the name that he has gone by.
With a Z, so it's acceptable.
Right, but it does look like he was attacked by a group of teenagers on the streets of Washington, D.C. late at night last week. There's a photo of him quite bloody that Trump has posted and said, look, I'm going to do something about this. But what he's going to do is he's going to clear out homeless encampments and send in the National Guard. His goal, he says, quote, is to essentially stop violent crime in Washington, D.C. D.C. is one of those places in the United States. Basically every city that you have, every major city, violent crime is down in Washington, D.C. It did spike during and after the pandemic, but it has come down considerably over the last year or two.
So one thing about D.C. that is interesting is it came down much more slowly than other cities. And I think there are a bunch of potential reasons for that. We actually did a cover story by Joe Bishop Henchman, or a feature story by Joe Bishop Henchman about this. He has served in, within the kind of DC government and had a lot of very specific points, including the narrow ways that DC is failing to just do common sense things within its criminal justice system. So stuff like people are arrested and then end up back on the street very quickly because we don't have the capacity to process them. We don't have the statutes to charge them under that make sense, that kind of thing. But I think that DC has always been in this very precarious position, which is that it's not autonomous. It is a special case. And in many ways, Trump does have some prerogatives over the city that he does not have in other places. And I would hate to see DC be a test case for, well, what if the federal government solves our crime problem? I think we're actually seeing that all over the country with kind of pushing the envelope on where can the National Guard be called out? Where can the FBI be employed?
Trump sent the National Guard to Los Angeles as part of the immigration scheme, the deportation scheme that he was running a month or two ago.
That makes me nervous in general for American freedom, but it makes me nervous in particular for DC, where there are fewer safeguards against that, where there is less clarity about who is in charge when. And of course, there is always the ultimate kind of problem of the budget, the money that flows into the DC government and out of the DC government has several kind of gates and locks on it that Congress controls and Trump controls Congress. So.
All right, let's move on here. I just want to end, though, on what I think is like a good note that we should be talking about more. Crime is down. Baltimore, of all places, which is, always for the last 25 years or so, you have The Wire, you have all of these kind of portrayals of Baltimore as this kind of crime-ridden hellscape. In the peak of summer, when you typically see violent crime as the worst, it went 16 days without a single homicide. Now, the fact that there was one on the 17th day is bad news, but 16 days without a homicide in Baltimore, that's good news. And I think a lot of it is just returning to post-pandemic normalcy, an end to COVID-era craziness. And it's not about passing a bunch of new, incredibly restrictive gun laws. All right, let's move on. We have a big show, lots more to talk about. Speaking of political stunts, we're going to check in on Texas Democrats. They're not in Texas anymore because they're mad about redistricting. Also going to talk a little bit about Donald Trump's big Alaskan summit with President Putin with Russian leader Vladimir Putin. Is this a path to peace, or is Trump just appeasing a dictator? Also going to dig into the big new free speech lawsuit against the White House. Folks at FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, are suing the Trump administration, and we're going to talk about that. But let's start with President Trump. He is meeting with Russian leader Vladimir Putin in Alaska later this week. That's going to be the first time a U.S. president has met with a Russian leader in the U.S. soil outside of the UN since 2007. So it's a big deal. And people are mad. Trump administration has proposed a peace deal or a ceasefire that would let Russians keep some Ukrainian territory. And Ukrainians have basically said, no way. So, Nick, I want to start with you here. As far as I can tell, there are kind of two main arguments. And the first one is this is a path to peace, and it's worth giving Russia a piece of land to stop the killing, even if it means negotiating with and kind of giving in to some of Putin's demands. And the second is this is appeasing an awful authoritarian leader who started a war of aggression by invading another country with the intent of conquest. So where do you fall here?
I understand fully why Ukraine would say no to something like this, particularly at the negotiating stage. I think Donald Trump's treatment of Zelensky in the White House a few months ago, along with J.D. Vance, was ridiculous and awful. I think Zelensky himself is not necessarily playing the best hand that he could. I think Putin is a horrible thug. I don't think it's in America's direct interest to be super embroiled in this. This is a European war. We can support freedom, and I think Zelensky is clearly on the side of freedom in a way that Putin is clearly not. But something that ends the war is a good thing. I don't think Trump has a lot of credibility in this, but he does have the power to actually bring the two principles to the table and make something happen.
So there's the two principles here. Obviously, it's Ukraine and Russia, but Europe is also involved, and European leaders keep saying, "Well, we have security interests too, and we want to be involved in this." So, Reem,
they could be doing this, right? But they haven't. So,
well, Reem, since you probably know European politics at least a little bit better than me, talk us through the kind of European view of this, right? European countries are saying they feel left out, and they don't want this to just be a Trump-Putin deal.
Yeah, I think part of the problem is that, I don't think this is a path to peace at all, right? I think that Putin is once again basically playing Trump like a fiddle. He is bombarding Ukraine, continuing to use some of the greatest possible degrees of strength. And yet at the same time, Trump will eventually then start doing some of the serious stuff, right? So selling and donating weapons on a larger scale, using those kind of influences, new sanctions, secondary tariffs, etc., to try and cripple Russia's oil exports, and then makes the smallest overtures for a ceasefire in order to then allow Trump to then just sit up, right? So I think, well, from the European perspective, it feels as though, obviously a lot of European countries haven't necessarily been as involved, and they quite frankly don't have the resources. Europe is extremely poor economically. There are lots of reasons for that, most of which are the fact that we have huge states that take a lot of our money and redistribute it. Now, part of the reason for that is, of course, the economics, but it means that politically, European countries are very reluctant to get involved directly. Of course, we've seen that some increasing support has occurred for Ukraine. Britain and France are both nuclear states. They have huge amounts of support, in particular, in those particular countries. And Europe does need to take a more leading stance in providing that kind of security. But I don't see it happening with Trump's direct involvement. And I actually think that he's sort of being played by Putin like a fiddle in that particular way. I'm very, very concerned about what's going to happen. I think any deal that concedes to Putin's aggression and rewards him for his extremely immoral war in Ukraine, I think is incredibly immoral and should not happen.
So what is the end game that you want to see here? Or just talk us through, what do European leaders who are uncomfortable with this being negotiated through the United States and through Trump, what is it that they want to see? How do they want this to end? Because I presume they don't want to just sort of keep going the way that it is.
Yeah, well, I think the European role is basically making sure that Ukraine doesn't just get sold down the river if Trump gets completely played by Putin. So that particular role is that in those kind of negotiations. I also think that Europe does need to take a much more leading role when it comes to guaranteeing security, not just to Ukraine, but in the event of a ceasefire agreement. If Europe does offer to do more of the heavy lifting on sort of guaranteeing security in the long term, then I think it will probably make it a lot easier for Trump to then press Putin on the issue. But Europe has a bit more to bargain with than it did at the start of last year, because Trump has done quite a good job at forcing Europe to try and rearm and build up stronger military capabilities. Poland, Finland, Sweden, and quite a few of the Baltic countries have been spending a lot more for a longer period of time. Germany is now seriously rearming, possibly as a result of Trump's pressure, and is leading to much higher quality arms provision. So I think that the Trump administration's pressure on Europe to try and rearm and actually protect Europe itself and sort of ensure that they're able to be responsible for their own security, I think has generally been a positive influence, but it really does depend on whether or not Trump is sort of going to completely get played by Putin in this way. And I mean, as I said, any deal that concedes Ukrainian land to the Russians, I think, is incredibly immoral and ultimately leads us down the path in which we are rewarding bad actors for bad behavior.
I think it's pretty telling that if you go look at what Russian media, Russian state media, pro-Putin media in Russia is saying, they are very happy with this meeting and what they see as sort of Trump playing along with Russian interests here. Katherine, what do you think? What do you think about all of that? What should the U.S. role here be? Everybody says it's, well, to protect American interests, but our interests can be defined so many different ways. What should America be doing about this conflict, if anything?
I think the Alaska of it all is fascinating here. Like the fact that this meeting is going to take place in Alaska, which the same people who think that Ukraine is rightful Russian territory, like the even more extreme versions of those people would say, like, and the sale of Alaska to the United States was a dirty deal too, and that's by rights Russian territory as well. I also saw something which was a term I had never heard, which perhaps just shows my illiteracy about global affairs, but the someone made a reference to the U.S. as an Arctic nation, like, and we have they been to
Washington D.C. in August?
It doesn't feel Arctic right now, but like the fact that our territory includes this category, this global category, was like something that is of no cultural salience to me, and I think to most Americans, but is the kind of thing that a Russian media, Russian audiences perhaps are going to care about. I also saw repeated references to the tradition of orthodoxy in Alaska, which maybe, I mean, Yuri Yushakov that posted that photo with the Russian Orthodox Church in Alaska saying, look, guys, it used to be Russian, it used to be Orthodox, and we just sold it to you guys. And it's so odd, right? Like, there are Orthodox churches throughout America. I'm actually baptized Romanian Orthodox. Like, you got a Orthodox gal right here on the podcast, but I don't think that's like, oh, we better cede me back to Romania. Like, I just, it's not how it works.
Don't take a vote of the staff, Katherine.
Yeah, fair enough. But there's something here. There's something here in like the blood and soil of it. And the idea that like there's sort of Russian blood in Alaskan soil makes me feel nervous for the whole stage setting of this meeting. And as Reem said, it makes it feel like maybe we're getting played.
I think it's, one thing to think about is Donald Trump, came into office saying he was going to end this war in 24 hours. That was one of his campaign promises.
He didn't say which 24 hours.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And he might have been talking in like biblical hours or something.
Football time.
But he, and he's also recently been saying like, I've stopped 6 wars in 6 months, which is an exaggeration, if not an outright lie. This is an indication of how this plays out, regardless of how it affects Europe. With Trump, he has a problematic relationship with Putin because he actually, he seemed to be thinking that he could control him. That is not happening. And at this point, right now, Russia is doing important deals with India and with China. And in a weird way, the Ukraine war, which has been a disaster for Russia. I mean, they have only been able to take over a small part of the country, which they were anticipating, totally occupying fully within about 72 hours. They have lost tons of men and tons of treasure and loot and all of that. But Trump has handled Putin extremely poorly, as did, if it's worth pointing out, Biden and Obama before him, all of whom were trying resets and things like that. But this, Trump, if he can pull off some kind of ceasefire that the sides can live with, and Peter, I agree. Putin is terrible. He's arguably the worst major leader on the planet today, a leader of a major country. But it is true that parts of Ukraine are contested territory for meaningful reasons. And the U.S. with Hillary Clinton and Obama were involved in all sorts of chicanery we shouldn't have been involved in. So it's complicated. But if Trump does get played here, I think that's going to really hurt his domestic standing, because it will show that he really is just all bark and no bite when it comes to his vaunted ability to cut deals to end wars.
All right, let's talk about contested territory elsewhere. In Texas, Texas Democrats aren't messing with Texas anymore. They are mad about a Republican redistricting plan, and so they've left the state for Illinois, for Chicago. Katherine, I want to start with you. Democrats have cried foul over these plans. I believe it was Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker literally said they're cheating. But the New York Times elections analyst, this is the New York Times, says this would not give Republicans a clear advantage in the United States House, right? This is not a plan that is just going to sort of make Republicans have a win button for national elections. So what's going on here?
This is the same thing that goes on periodically. Like this is sort of starting to feel to me like part of the rhythm of my life is like we have the threatened government shutdowns at the federal level because the Congress can't do a budget. And then, is it already legislators flee Texas o'clock? Oh, I guess it is. Here we are. Texas redistricting is an especially bonkers system. And this is not the first time that this has happened. I think that the problem is that we are in a state in politics where it's all or nothing, where everything feels existential, and so there is no longer a kind of either a willingness to just say like, all right, well, we lost a seat this time, we'll gain a seat next time. That's how redistricting works, which has historically been true. There's also, I would say, like no longer as much of a sense of like, I hesitate to say this, but like fun. Like, I think like the first time I heard about legislators fleeing Texas to avoid being like pulled into a quorum to do a vote on this, everybody was kind of like, ha, wacky, like we're hiding in Oklahoma at a motel.
It's summer camp.
It's
right?
Summer camp.
They chartered a plane for this one.
Well, right. So that's the thing, right? The first time that I remember hearing about it, it was much more like slapdash, willy-nilly, a bunch of people just got into their RVs and headed out of town. And now it's like a kabuki. It's like a ritual. It's a whole thing. This is the same thing that happens with judicial appointments at the federal level. It's the same thing that happens with so much of what should be our normal legislative process is once somebody does a gambit one time and it kind of works, then it becomes obligatory. And so I do think we're here at this point now where everybody is very head up, understandably so. And the prospect of using the FBI to hunt down wayward Texas Democrats to bring them back to get a quorum to do a probably fine-ish redistricting thing. This just mostly feels like some fucking third world nonsense, and I'm embarrassed for us.
Nick, how do you feel about Texas Governor Greg Abbott's threat to arrest all of these Democrats if they set foot on Texas again for violating their oath of office or their duty to their office or something like that?
I love it when self-declared conservatives are constantly coming up with innovative ways to advance their agenda. That fly in the face of tradition. As Katherine pointed out, this is not new in Texas or in other states. It is not solely Republicans who do this kind of thing, but it is out of the ordinary, and it is in no way conservative. And when you have conservatives starting to defend, we're going to break with tradition because it happens to help us gain a momentary advantage. It's pathetic. And, the idea that the FBI, I mean, I guess, anything that pulls men off of the Epstein file release, case or hunting down migrants or something, why not? I go back, anytime you invoke the FBI, just remember that they were not able to decipher the lyrics of Louie Louie after spending 18 months trying to do this. So good luck with that.
It definitely sounds like they're saying, hey, booty, get better.
Yeah, gerrymandering goes back to 1812. That's when the term named after Elbridge Gerry, was invented. So this is kind of politics as usual, but to follow up on Catherine's absolutely correct point, that this is third world country type stuff. We are in a free fall of trust and confidence in institutions, particularly governmental institutions. This kind of maneuvering only I don't know, what comes after free fall, but it's like you're throwing a weight vest on whoever is dropping without a parachute. It's just, it's not good. And ultimately, it's not necessarily going to be that effective. At various points, every party tries to gerrymander their state into, an absolute 1,000-year Reich. And it never works. The country is evenly split at the national level. Certain states have flipped red and others have stayed blue. Independent of all of this, in the end, this stuff is not what determines where the country goes. It's really these larger big picture visions of government. And at this point, we're kind of stuck with no good options.
Nick,
Democrats are definitely threatening to retaliate here with their own redistricting. Sorry, Katherine, go ahead.
It just feels really important to tell you, Nick, that what comes after free fall is a landing, like a splat.
Oh, okay.
I just want
we have that
don't
to
want
look
you to head out
forward
into
to.
the world without
okay,
that knowledge.
yeah. I mean, I'm thinking an infinite abyss.
Not if you're on the Tower of Terror at Universal Studios in 2002. Reem, I just want to ask you, what do people in the UK think of this? Do they just look and go, Americans are totally crazy, especially in Texas?
Yes, exactly that. I mean, honestly, the European mind can't really comprehend gerrymandering because it's just so mental.
The European mind cannot comprehend meme.
Comprehend. What is going on? It's so odd, actually, because, I mean, in the UK, we have 4 independent boundary commissions, one for England, Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland, that independently decide the boundaries, and they use that based on data. I basically think in the US, there are probably about 3 different solutions, most of which have to do with changing some of those laws. So I think the first solution could be to just enlarge the House of Representatives and basically say, right now it's capped to 435 members since, was it the 1920s? If each seat then there's a much a larger number of seats and it's a fixed number of people, then it would make it so much harder for partisan gerrymandering. And actually, I think, if I'm getting my US history correct, this was a proposal that was initially going to be the Second Amendment, but it ended up not being passed because it was very poorly worded. Another option would be to have proportional representation. So each state getting a number of seats at each census, and then they are then selected proportionately. It basically makes gerrymandering impossible. And a third option would just be having a very, very high threshold for voting. So maybe we'd still end up in a situation that Texas is in, but each state perhaps needing 5/6 majority in order to pass a particular electoral map. It's obviously a lot more complicated, but there definitely are solutions. And I think from a European perspective, it's very, very difficult to comprehend why this is even still the case. And perhaps maybe looking at some of those particular instances in which we're able to actually achieve those particular goals. I cannot believe the different shapes of your constituencies. Insane.
But some of that, in defense of that, some of that makes sense because depending, I grew up in New Jersey and there's a long, coastline there. And, people, who are 100 miles apart, north and south on the beach have probably have more common interests than if you go 25 miles inland. Related to, various kinds of things. So the shape of districts is not necessarily a bad thing. And, kind of trying to find we're trying to find representative government, and how you define that changes. I think in the end that this is mostly a distraction from, just larger questions of are political parties governing well where they end up taking over? And the fact is, Texas is a great example. 40 years ago, it was a yellow dog Democrat state. There was no way the Republicans were ever going to take over. And they did it, mostly by offering a better alternative in terms of governance to Democrats. And of course, now they want to try and lock it in. And they redistricted just a few years ago. And it shouldn't be done on if it's done every election, things are going to become problematic, I think, just in terms of people not knowing what's going on. But ultimately, it comes down to is your party delivering a better vision, and actual results for people?
I'll just go on to it quickly. Sorry, I think that's a really, really important point, actually, because I think that whilst there are ways that you can solve the gerrymandering problem, and I do think it's extremely undemocratic, fundamentally, red or blue, does it actually make a difference as to what policies are being implemented, how large the state is, how much the government are damaging people's lives? I mean, really, that's what matters. And I sort of agree with Nick here. I think it is largely a distraction for the real issues that the US government are implementing.
All right, when we come back, we're going to talk about one of those real issues, an issue where Americans think Brits are crazy, free speech. After this.
So generally, when I make big purchases, I just buy whatever Wirecutter tells me. And I had a couple of Wirecutter recommended mattresses in my cart because I needed to buy a new one when, miraculously, the Roundtable was contacted by Brooklyn Bedding, the makers of one of those mattresses. So I received a new mattress from Brooklyn Bedding, the Aurora Luxe cooling mattress, and I'm going to try it and report back. The problem is that I am not currently where my mattress is. It's pretty tragic. I'm pretty sad about it. It is at my home. I'm at the beach. I will be back soon. But in the meantime, I was able to check out their website, which says that I can leave my mattress in the box for up to 3 weeks. I won't have to wait that long. Neither will you. In the meantime, if you want to go check out their products, it's brooklynbedding.com, and you can use the discount code REASON to get 30% off.
Okay, our listener question comes from Henry in the UK, who writes, "There is much to love about the UK. We have hundreds of miles of picturesque coastline, but where free speech is concerned, we are heading downwards and picking up speed. There's plenty to say about this Blighty-themed shit show. I love that. But what interests me most is this: the justifications for censorship increasingly lean on psychological studies. For example, a recent investigation into the effects of pornography cites several studies claiming to show that porn, especially violent porn, alters men's attitudes and behaviors towards women. How do you respond to these kinds of arguments? Is it just scientism, or should we be more open to arguments that human behavior, spelled the British way, is as manipulable as animal behavior given the right programming? I'm loath to put down my dear old country. We have hundreds of miles of great-looking coastline." He didn't actually say great-looking. He said super fucking picturesque. Super fucking picturesque coastline. But I really wish we had a First Amendment right now. The First Amendment is good, Henry. It's good. Reem, let's start with you. What do you think?
I agree, Henry. I'm really sad too. Britain is so beautiful, and I cannot bear to see this great country in decline. I mean, when it comes to freedom of expression, we're really down the rabbit hole here. We have a young woman who is currently serving a 31-month sentence for a social media post, one single social media post that was up for 4 hours, that she deleted after 4 hours, that basically said something along the lines of, these asylum seeker hotels are really bad and we should burn them down. That's what she said is the gist in that tweet. And she's serving 31 months. It's absolutely outrageous. We basically have 3 different types of legislation that cause these kind of restrictions. We have ones on terror, hate speech, and these online restrictions. The pornography point, I think, is interesting because people have only started to care about the Online Safety Act when it was implemented a couple of weeks ago, when they no longer could access pornography without putting in their own identification. Now everybody suddenly really cares about online speech restrictions. And, a couple of years ago, when a lot of us were talking about the Online Safety Act, when it was an act and not a bill, not a law, sorry, when it was actually looking at that bill going through Parliament, a lot of people were advocating against it, but now all of a sudden people start to care. Things are really awful in the UK when it comes to freedom of expression. We need to repeal a lot of this legislation. But I think this comes down to a simple fact, especially when we're comparing the US and the UK. The Americans as a whole, as a peoples, seem to have within them an innate support for liberty, an innate support for freedom of expression, for the idea that you're able to have a marketplace of ideas and exchange ideas freely. We must defend all speech, including the most grotesque and disgusting things that people have said, because fundamentally it means that we're able to have that individual liberty, but also we're able to see what is it people are thinking, what is it people are saying. We're able to have a marketplace of ideas and exchange those ideas. We've got to repeal so much of this legislation. And to answer Henry's question on when it comes to things like scientism, I think that a lot of it is questions about whether or not individual people can make those decisions based on what they want to do, right? If you're an individual, you can make a decision about whether or not you think consuming certain types of content are harmful. As adults, you can make that decision. In the UK, we have now restricted that so much to the point that if you do want to consume certain types of content, you have to give over all of your data to the British government. The British government that, by the way, have been in multiple data leaks and data leak scandals over the last few years, including very recently, where we released lots of data of Afghani people that have informed the British government and put their lives at risk with the Taliban. So I don't trust the British government with my data. I completely understand why lots of other Brits don't either.
And just very briefly, the Online Safety Act that you're talking about, this is a relatively recent law, right?
Yeah.
And it is designed, if I understand correctly, primarily the advocates for it will say it's designed to protect children from harmful content, particularly violent and sexual content, right? That's basically the gist of it. And so it ends up being an age verification law.
Yes, it is. But it also means that obviously lots of social media companies have to comply with those costs. So the bar has become incredibly high. There was the one example a lot of people are using is the R-Cider Reddit section on, what is it called on Reddit? The section on Reddit, the blog.
Subreddit?
Subreddit, that's the word I'm looking for. The subreddit.
Like a miniature Reddit?
Yeah, so the Cider subreddit is now completely age restricted. If you want to access it, you have to give over your passport details. And what it just ends up causing is lots of people are using VPNs. So people are just completely bypassing the legislation. And the government, it's really funny actually, because it's a great example of the government implementing a law and then expecting everybody to abide by said law. And what we're seeing in the UK is an increasing willingness to break the law because the laws have become so stupid that more and more people are willing to break the law. Now, the problem is when you cross that path and when you're willing to break the law, it means that you're willing to break lots of other laws. And we are seeing increasing lawlessness in the UK, both with physical harms and online harms. And what that does mean is that we're seeing the government increasingly implement restrictions on people's freedom of expression, on their privacy, and on their individual rights. And then at the same time, people just completely bypassing that using technology. Just one very small point. What it does show is that technology is a really, really great way of protecting your freedom when the government try and take it away. The VPNs have basically meant that people in the UK have been able to bypass the government's dangerously authoritarian laws, and there's nothing the government can do about it.
Katherine, does the UK need a First Amendment?
Everybody needs a First Amendment. If anything, we need a First Amendment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good place to start.
We're going to get to that in a minute.
But yes, I basically just want to give an amen to everything Reem just said. And in particular, I do think this idea that people really underestimate the danger of stupid laws because they make people like us, but even people who are less cynical libertarian assholes, start to question all of it. They start to question the kind of justice of the state. Now, do I secretly maybe enjoy that a little bit? Sure. I want people to understand the sort of villainy that they are facing, but the transition costs are extremely high living in a low trust society, as Nick has written and said many times, and especially a society where people don't trust each other and turn to the state to fix social problems takes you down a more, not less authoritarian path.
Nick, so like I said, the Online Safety Act was intended to protect children from harmful content, but it's just had all of these unintended consequences. There was actually a very good column by Taylor Lorenz, the internet's most hated tech journalist, in The Guardian recently, and she just wrote about a bunch of the crazy things that has happened. In the past 2 weeks, she writes, the UK has reportedly blocked internet users access to everything from SpongeBob SquarePants GIFs to a bunch of Spotify playlists. Information about Joe Biden's police funding has been restricted. There's stuff like gamers are not able to tweak colors in Minecraft. I don't understand how this is protecting kids from, is it like a really offensive color, right? And it's all because of this new age verification
law. It will turn
law.
them gay. Probably. I mean, SpongeBob and the Teletubbies, England's own, were obviously major vectors for the homosexualization and transgenderizing of American culture, or of world culture, really, Peter. So I think the regulators know exactly what they're doing. What I will say, in kind of following up on what Reem is talking about, there was a great book from 25 years ago called Orwell's Revenge, the 1984 palimpsest, which talked about how all of the attempts to use technology to surveil and protect people, it ends up getting used against them. I remember reading in the mid 80s at some point in the Wall Street Journal, a fantastic story about how in North Korea, the government had bought a bunch of high-tech listening devices and whatnot to put in public places so they could really listen in on people's conversations, at the one or two coffee shops that sold, colored water as coffee. And immediately all of that stuff was stolen, and then it was repurposed into receivers for radio message, just radio programming and stuff like that from South Korea and other countries. This is a predictable result. And, because it is so predictable, politicians should just stop implementing laws unless they are secretly, holding shares in like next generation technology companies that are going to benefit from all of this. I mean, go through who owns all the VPN companies. Because the only reason people are using VPNs in the ways that they are is because of increasingly stupid legislation.
Yeah, people want to say the things they want to say. They want to watch the things they want to watch, and they will take incredible risks to do so if they are restricted. You see this in China and Russia, but you see this in North Korea. There was a story recently about people risking life imprisonment or worse, basically just to watch American television. That's how powerful free speech is. That's how powerful great culture is. All right. As a reminder, we love to answer your questions. We love it so much, we're answering even more of them on YouTube. A little bonus show we call Table for Two. So if you have a question for the Roundtable, email us your short, succinct, pithy, otherwise not very long question to podcasts at reason.com. That's podcasts at reason.com. Alrighty, last week, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, that's FIRE, sued Secretary of State Marco Rubio, challenging two federal immigration law provisions that give Rubio, nominally, the authority to deport immigrants for protected speech. Basic argument here is non-citizens have First Amendment rights, but the Trump administration has targeted foreign university students who are in the United States legally for deportation based on protected speech, like writing op-eds or attending protests. The FIRE suit argues, in essence, that in the United States, you have a right to criticize the government. You have a right to say things that people don't like, even if you're not a full-fledged citizen, if you are here legally. Nick, what do you think of this?
I think, this is the next chapter in FIRE's ongoing glorious history of, standing up for protected speech that is also unpopular, particularly among conservatives and Republicans. There is a widespread revulsion towards all immigrants, legal and illegal, but especially people who say things that they find offensive or they think are anti-patriotic and whatnot. I think this is exactly the type of, 50 years ago, this would have been the ACLU taking up this cause. Now it is FIRE, and we will have better laws because of it, because if this goes to the Supreme Court will rule in favor of free speech and the First Amendment. We've got a very good court for that. We have had for the past 50 years. And so, more power to FIRE. This is never popular. That's the one thing, it's always in retrospect, you can say like, oh yeah, those guys were doing the right thing. I would have done that. FIRE consistently is doing that no matter how unpopular the cause is, but the principles are right. And, the First Amendment guarantees free speech to everybody, regardless of citizenship status, as long as you're not talking about the violent overthrow of the government or causing imminent, kind of law breaking.
Reem, what do you think about this suit, just generally, but also how would something like this play in the UK? I know that there's just a lot of anti-immigrant sentiment that is building up in the United Kingdom.
There is a huge amount of anti-immigrant sentiment building up in the UK, and we actually just proscribed a activist group, Palestine Action, which is interesting. I mean, it seems as though both the right and the left in the UK are completely bonkers on free speech. The right want to restrict the left's speech, the left want to restrict the right speech. It's a whole thing. I mean, I really, really love what FIRE have done, because what they are doing is they are actively acting on the First Amendment, actively protecting those particular rights. And I mean, they're absolutely right. There is no provision that excludes non-citizens versus citizens in terms of their rights with the First Amendment, which is the case when it comes to things like is it a jury service, some other aspects of that where effectively the Constitution does, I've written it down, election eligibility and things like that. So the Constitution does separate and distinguish between citizens and non-citizens and other aspects, but it doesn't do so when it comes to the First Amendment. So it's, I think, very, very clear that the First Amendment applies to everybody, no matter what your citizenship status is. And the question of whether or not it would play well in the UK, I mean, we need a First Amendment. We need something that solidifies our right to freedom of expression. But as
you couldn't even have a suit like this in the United Kingdom, right?
We couldn't, because we don't have a First Amendment. We don't have a constitutional right to freedom of expression. Freedom of expression is something that is restricted everywhere in the UK. You know, there are women that have been arrested outside of abortion clinics for thinking and praying silently in their minds. They've been arrested for literally praying in their heads. It's absolutely bonkers. And the fact of the matter is, in the UK, there isn't an appetite for a First Amendment. People in the UK don't care about liberty in the same way that Americans do, which is the bane of my existence. But unfortunately, it's the case, and we have to make sure they only start to care when it's them that are being targeted. And I think we're in a really, really sticky situation where we have been going down this path for a very long time. New laws, new regulations on speech continuously keep getting introduced. Just this weekend, 500 people were arrested for holding up placards saying they supported Palestine Action. They were arrested because Palestine Action, this activist group that have committed criminal damage in the past, but 500 of these people were arrested because they held up a placard saying they supported it. Freedom of expression is dead. If it was ever alive in the UK, it is almost certainly dead now.
Katherine, you support liberty in the United States. You have that instinct inside you. You also said earlier on this podcast that the United States needs a First Amendment. Sounds like maybe you think sometimes we don't have one, or at least it's not as strong as you would like. Is this a good way, is the FIRE suit a good way to shore up the First Amendment?
I think it is from a legal perspective. I think it's a much more open question from a public opinion perspective. And that's actually where the problem is. Like, as you say, the courts have been fine on this, and they will probably rule in a way that will support free speech when it comes to them. But if you poll Americans, they don't think hate speech is protected speech. They think, they believe that the scope of our speech rights is smaller than in fact it is, and they are fine with that. And that is very consistent finding in polls. And so when I say we need a First Amendment, in some ways what I mean is we need a public that more is sort of better informed and also understands the ramifications of stuff like prohibitions on hate speech, because they can see it all around the world. There are plenty of places where you can see what that means, and it doesn't look good. I also just think anywhere where you're getting a mention of Alien and Sedition Acts, which is coming up in this case, we've gone off the rails. That was a pretty dark chapter in American history, and we do not need to keep relitigating it, except for apparently we do.
Can I just ask, what do you think most Americans would define hate speech as? Because I mean, that's obviously a discussion across the board that continuously happens. But what do you think
see it in some polling. Sometimes they dig down, and my uncharitable take is they often just define it as speech I don't like. Whatever it is I don't like, that's hate speech.
Speech I hate.
Yes, the speech that I hate is hate speech. And more charitably, I would say that there is a natural instinct on the part of many people to say, if it's bad, maybe it should be illegal. And of course, there's all kinds of speech that people engage in all the time that I think are reprehensible and disgusting. And I wish people wouldn't say that stuff, and I wouldn't let them say that stuff in my living room. But the distinction between that and it should be illegal is tragically lost. On
point we make on this podcast all the time. all the time is that for free speech to mean anything, it has to protect the ugliest speech, the worst, the most horrible, the most offensive stuff, the stuff that you hate the most. All of that speech that you hate. It's not hate speech, or I mean, maybe it's hateful, but it shouldn't be illegal. What the fire case does, I think, interestingly, is that it says, in addition to protecting the worst speech, it also has to protect it for everyone, at least everyone who is here legally. If you want a robust First Amendment and robust free speech protections, then the free speech has to have the largest possible umbrella covering the most possible stuff and the most possible people. And this is how you protect it, is you don't let the camel's nose under the tent ever at all. Okay, we're going to move on to our final segment, what you've been watching and consuming in the cultural arena: books, movies, television shows, other things that may be of interest to Reason readers, listeners, and watchers here. Catherine, let's start with you. You've been on vacation, been doing any reading?
I have read many, many books, and I'm actually not going to talk about a book. I'm going to talk, as I often do when I return from my week at the beach, about a board game. The group that I go to the beach with, we are big board game players, and we have talked a lot of smack about Europe during this podcast. And so I want to redeem it by saying, first of all, most of the great new board games coming out of Europe. You got to give those guys credit. Those Germans making good board games. So, but in particular, I played Ticket to Ride.
I'll take that as a compliment.
Ticket to Ride.
Well, I'm not sure why, but yeah.
Suderman. Suderman is a German name, my friend.
Okay. Ticket to Ride, excellent game. Good for the whole family, but not too stupid for adults. You build rail routes across some territory. Ticket to Ride.
I got to tell you right now, Germans building rail routes all across Europe. I'm out.
Nicholas Gillespie, you let me talk. It's a very good game in general, and the tweaks that this version makes, which includes being able to build train stations and ride on other people's rails, are not libertarian, but they do make the game more fun. And if you are looking for a good board game, Ticket to Ride Europe is what I recommend to you. But also, if you're looking for a stupid board game, I will remind you of what I think I recommended last year, which is the game Abduction, where duck is spelled like the bird, and it features tiny plastic birds that get abducted by aliens. It's a good game also.
Libertarians like imaginary trains, right? Simulated trains
fictional trains.
It's
that
not
run
clear
on high power steel.
Fake trains.
Yeah, it is not clear who is building the trains in this game. To be fair, we do not. It's not clear that you're playing as a state. So maybe we're just all playing as Brightline or
individual private companies.
That's
there
right.
You go.
Do we know where the trains end, though? That's the big thing. Where do the trains? Where's the terminus?
Not in any concentration camps, if that's what you're worried about.
All right, good.
All right.
Just
let's take the train to the
Yep.
next recommendation here. I think I can. Nick Gillespie.
I went to and participated in the Ron Paul barbecue / 90th birthday party in Lake Jackson, Texas, where for about 8 hours, people, including characters such as Dave Smith, Justin Amash, Tulsi Gabbard, came and gave their respects to Ron Paul, the famous former Republican congressman who also ran for president, first as a libertarian in 1988 and then as a Republican in 2008 and 2012, and really kickstarted a revolution that kind of became the Tea Party or infused the Tea Party and a lot of other stuff. It was a wonderful kind of discussion and analysis. I mean, it was very festive. It was not highly critical in any negative way of Ron Paul's legacy. It's all online, including a live stream that I did with Kennedy of Fox News and Justin Amash. I also did a couple of interviews with other people, and it's all there. It's fascinating. Ron Paul, particularly in his presidential runs in 2008 and 2012, but especially the first one, really changed what it meant, what was possible for Republicans to talk about. He is the reason why we have an anti-war kind of dimension in Republican politics now, and I think more broadly in the country in a way, to the extent that people were tired of George Bush and looked to Barack Obama as the anti-war candidate. Obama was not in any way, shape, or form anti-war. Ron Paul gave voice to that. He popularized the idea of ending the Fed and more clearly, an interest in getting rid of debt and deficits and looking at sound money. He was a late adopter of Bitcoin, but there's no question that his gold buggery helped give rise to and infuse the crypto and particularly the Bitcoin world with energy. So it was fantastic. And he also gave a talk where incredibly optimistic. He had a stroke not too long ago. He's fully recovered from that and gave this incredible, rousing, positive vision of American politics where the government does less and spends less, and we're all left to our own devices to build the worlds that we want to within this larger kind of, territory that we would call America. It was a wonderful evening, a wonderful day.
Happy birthday, Ron Paul. Reem, what do you have for us?
So I've recently been reading a book by the Institute of Economic Affairs' founder, Anthony Fisher, which was published many, many, many moons ago, way before I was born, called Why History Matters, or Must History Repeat Itself? And I think what's interesting about it is it really does provide a radical interpretation for what the state can do and what the state shouldn't do. And what's interesting about it is almost all of the problems that he identified in the 70s and the 60s basically are the problems that we still have today. And that is the problem of big government. The fact that the welfare state is enormously huge and it incentivizes huge numbers of people to not work. We've got a huge worklessness crisis in the UK. About 21% of the working age population are economically inactive, which is insane. And I think part of the problem is that the government as a whole is increasing in its size. Public spending as a proportion of GDP is about 44%, which is absolutely enormous. And I think that the wider conversations that we've been having have been about how can the government in its current size just be better, rather than how can the government be radically smaller. And what we need are those radical ideas for a smaller government. Now, the reason why I love this is because it's obviously a very, very old book, and it's, completely lacks all of the foresight of today. But Anthony Fisher was a chicken farmer, and he learnt all of his practices from the Americans. So he brought over American chicken farming practices and brought them into the UK. And that's what I think is so fantastic about the story, because he effectively saw what was going on in the US, brought that over to the UK, and that's why he, through his everyday work, sort of learned about why the government was harming him and how the government was preventing him from being a great chicken farmer. So yeah, it's a great book. It's very old, and I think it's really interesting in terms of its insights and historical context for what we can learn about today.
Please stop calling things from the 1970s very, very old. Thank you.
My apologies.
Don't apologize for speaking the truth.
So I saw, like I said earlier, a great new movie, Weapons. This is the new movie from Barbarian director Zach Kreger. It's his second film, and it is a hell of a movie. It's kind of intentionally difficult to interpret. There's not one super clear metaphor here, like you see in a lot of kind of modern elevated horror, where you see, oh, that's a really apt or deft metaphor, and it turns out to mean that that's a really obvious metaphor, and this is not a really obvious metaphor movie. Instead, it's just this incredibly intricate, tightly made kind of Quentin Tarantino style non-linear thriller that has a horror element. But the big idea, to the extent that there is one, is that it is about kids, because the premise here is that an entire classroom full of children disappears from their homes one night at 2:17 a.m. They all, you see on the home security cameras, they all just leave their homes somewhat mysteriously and disappear into the darkness, except for one kid. So what happened? Does it have something to do with that one kid who's left? Does it have something to do with the teacher? What are the police going to do about this? What are the school authorities going to do about this? What you see throughout this movie is that all of the authority figures all of the rules and the systems. There's like constantly sort of like, I won't say constant, but there's just this kind of peppering of references to, oh, you're a mandatory reporter. Oh, I have to talk to your guardian. All of these kind of legal rules and procedures that have to be followed when dealing with kids. And they never actually help the kids. It never actually makes anything better. And something has happened to these children. And part of what is so powerful about this movie is that it leaves you, it's such a freaking mystery. This is not a movie where you can sort of guess where it is going from the opening 10 minutes or the opening half an hour. Even, nearly 2 hours into this film, you're going to be, where in the world is this going? And I'll tell you, it goes somewhere pretty crazy and pretty interesting and incredibly tense and entertaining. But the one big idea is that people have weaponized children. People have weaponized children for their ends, whatever those ends are, but that is not for the benefit of the kids. It is for the adult purposes and for the adult agendas, because the adults are not trying to help the kids. What they're trying to do is serve themselves and follow a bunch of bureaucratic rules that don't actually help here. And it's a fantastic thriller, a great horror movie. And one of the movies that has just I only saw it a few days ago, but it has stuck with me, and I'm thinking about this movie. I think along with Eddington, which is the pandemic film from Ari Aster, just this fantastic movie about what we all went through in 2020 and how we all went crazy. It's not quite a rule of three trend situation here, but we are starting to see some of our young, powerful, excellent filmmakers. These guys are, under 45 and directing movies. And we are starting to see them reckon with what society did to us, to all of us, what happened in 2020 and beyond. And it's kind of fascinating to see, especially since the movies are so good. As always, if you like this podcast, you can support us by going to reason.com/donate. That's reason.com/donate. Stop the darkness. Make light happen. Thank you all so much for listening and watching. The Reason Roundtable will return. Thank you, Reem, for joining us.
What you're selling.